on behalf of the Victoria Shore Project and Congregation Emmanuel of Victoria, BC, Canada, welcome to all of our guests and friends from Vancouver Island, British Columbia, from across Canada, the United States, and overseas from the UK, the Czech Republic, Paris, Denmark, Israel, wherever you might be. My name is Richard Kuhl, and I'm a member of the Victoria Shore Project and on the board of directors of the historic Congregation Emmanuel. It's my deep honor to be able to host this virtual event, and I hope that the technological spirits that watch over such things will be with us today. Maenni Ruben was a Danish violinist and graphic artist, and he had the autograph book that we're looking at today. A book where his friends and acquaintances who were living in the Theresienstadt concentration camp signed, sketched, and composed. Susi Deston, Maenni's wife, kept this book after his untimely demise, traveled it from Copenhagen to Israel to South Africa to Canada to British Columbia and Vancouver Island. And after her death, Jana Ginsberg Blevis had the sechel, the smarts, the energy, and the connections to take the book and bring it out from Susi's safekeeping to a wide audience, both public and academic, through the project that we've now created. This virtual launch of both panels, interpretive panels, and the autograph book itself is meant to honor both Maenni and Susi and the memory of those whose lives intersected in space and time in the Theresienstadt camp. None of the artists, composers, musicians, or rabbis who wrote in this book are alive, but we can sense their lives through their traces here. The entire event will take about 40 minutes. We'll begin with Jana introducing the project, and then we'll show briefly the 10 posters created by the wonderful graphic artist Carrie McKinley. From there, we'll segue into a series of short presentations, which we've recorded. We'll be greeted by Dr. Jan Rubenek, director of the Terezin Memorial in the Czech Republic, and we'll learn about Maenni from his nephew, Josta Tixel, now living in Israel. From other academics, scholars, and friends, we'll learn about the autograph book, its contents, and its context.
Hello, I'm Jana Ginsberg Blevis from Congregation Emmanuel in Victoria, BC. Our rabbi, Harry Breckner, in 2019, showed me an autograph book given to him by our late congregant, Susi Deston, that belonged to her first husband, Maenni Ruben. Maenni was a young Danish violinist from Copenhagen, and in 1943, he and his parents and his siblings were sent to Theresienstadt, a Nazi ghetto camp near Prague. Called Terezin, it was a walled military town built in 1780 by Emperor Joseph II to honor his mother Teresa. Built for 8,000 people, during the war as many as 35,000 to 50,000 were housed at any given time. Maenni's book contains greetings, pieces of music, and drawings. It is in remarkable shape, and it looks like it hasn't been opened in 75 years. I could see right away that it belonged in a museum, and we began looking to donate the book to a Canadian museum. The book begins in 1945 as the war is ending. What makes this so unique is that there is hope and optimism. People survived and are looking ahead to beginning life again. Knowing the book would leave Victoria, we created an exhibit of 10 panels, each with a different theme, such as music, art, and friendship. Each panel is illustrated with some pages from the book. We also made a replica book. Each page is one page of the autograph book, its translation, and additional notes on many of the people. There are many interesting people in the book. Rabbi Leo Beck, who was an important figure in the Reform movement and an intellectual. Alice Summer Hers, a pianist about whom an Academy Award-winning film was made in 2013 called The Lady in Number 6. Illustrator Joe Spear, And despite the terrible conditions people endured, music flourished in Theresienstadt. Well-known European musicians went back to careers they had in music. And there are also many beautiful drawings by Hilda Zadekow. So many people helped to make this happen, and I thank you all for the work, especially Rick Kuhl. And I thank the family for sharing Maenni with us. This is really an homage to Susi, without whom we wouldn't have any of this. When Susi came to Victoria, she brought Maenni's autograph book and the violin he played in the camp. Maenni never set foot here, and yet he has become a friend to us through this process. May we introduce you to Maenni and some of the people he came to know in the camp.
My dear Canadian friends, my name is Jan Rubinek, and I am a director of Terezin Memorial. I have to say that our institution, Terezin Memorial, established in 1947, has an excellent relation with Canada through Canadian Embassy in Prague. Just few days ago, we were opening an exhibition about genocide of Roma people during World War II, and Canadian ambassador Aisha Patricia Reiki came to the opening in order to represent that human rights are very important for Canadian people. Human rights of Roma, Jews, blacks, white people, all of us. I am talking to you from former ghetto Theresienstadt, today town of Terezin in the Czech Republic. It is extremely touching to hear about Danish violinist Maenni Ruben, imprisoned in the ghetto, and his autograph book. Terezin ghetto was very well known by flourishing cultural life of its prisoners before their deportation to the east, and so we keep thousands of documents and similar pieces of art since the middle of the 60s. We try to keep that way alive human lives associated with these artifacts, and I truly believe we do it professionally. Once COVID-19 is over, I would like to invite you to Terezin Memorial. You will be able to learn more about people like Maenni Ruben, people who spent several months or even years here during World War II. We are here to remember their names and life stories for you. So, see you very soon in Terezin Memorial. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Rabbi Harry Breckner, and Susi Deston was a congregant and a good friend. I got to know Susi very, very well, and I think the first time I encountered Maenni's autograph book was having tea with her and her late husband Avi in her apartment. And what was remarkable is that after Susi died and I had to gather information, I had her wallet. And in her wallet, she had on one side a picture of Avi, and the other side was a picture of Maenni, the two men who she truly loved in this life. And I know that the book on some level had great meaning for her because she wanted me to make sure that I got it after her death. But many years ago, I tried to get her to give me the book that I could bring it to a Holocaust researcher, Paul Hamburg, to look at it and to find a home for it. And her response was, there's thousands of these copies, don't worry about it, it has no meaning whatsoever. But I did finally bring it to Paul and learned that it had great meaning, that it was a very special kind of an artifact from the Shoah. And I think for my end from Susi is that she was always living from the outside. She never fully had her home anywhere after the war. One of my favorite Susi stories is when she first got to Canada and met some people, they asked her if she played bridge, and her answer was, "Nai, I played the cello." Because music, her cello and Maenni's violin, were things that were very, very dear to her. And Susi had a knack of telling stories, and she could bring up incredible details about a bouquet that she saw 40 years ago. And she would talk to me about Maenni's art. He was also a visual artist, often doing graphic art, and the kind of work that they would do together and the deep love, I think, that they shared. And, and Susi was a very young widow in Copenhagen, and after Maenni's death. But Maenni left her, I think, a sense of wholeness and a sense of goodness, and he left her a very beautiful and important violin, and also this really remarkable book. So when I think about things that I want to remember, right? I had a book like that when I graduated from elementary school before I moved on to what was then called junior high school. And that's what that first book reminded me of. And then going through it and reading some of the things that are there, at least reading the translations, it's very, very striking. That sense of camaraderie and familyhood that comes from tragedy. And I'm just really glad that we're able to give this book a solid home. I hope it's a place that people have a chance to study it and to use it and to enjoy its whimsy, because there's, in spite of all the darkness, there's great light in that book of whimsy and music and incredible wishes and comic drawings as well as sketches. And I think it's really just a gem.
When I was first shown Maenni Ruben's album of memories from Theresienstadt, I was struck by how similar it was to other kinds of albums I've seen in Germany and the Netherlands, places like that, where such things are fairly common and tend to be produced by families for family use. But I quickly discovered there was something more complex going on in the case of this album. As I looked through and started to figure out what the content of the inscriptions or greetings were, something like a high school yearbook, but not a high school you ever wanted to attend, of course. The inscriptions were, in some cases, very hard to decipher. They were dashed off in old forms of scripts, of cursive scripts that the people writing them had learned probably 100 years ago, seen from today, 20 or more years ago in their case. They are hard to read, and they were written in haste. And so it took quite a lot of paleographical figuring to make sense of them. Some of them were perfectly clear. The sketches and cartoons are both gorgeous and horrifying. The barracks, spots where people were quartered both inside and outside the camp. The bus, in particular, leaving the camp probably just after liberation. The white bus returning to Sweden or to Scandinavia. The images themselves are devoid of explicit horror, but they speak of a horror that these people endured. As I got deeper into figuring out not just what the inscriptions said, but who the writers of the inscriptions were, I realized this was no ordinary manual of or album of reminiscences. This was an album composed by a large number of celebrities of the musical world of the time, as well as other celebrities like Rabbi Leo Beck, one of the leaders of the Reform movement in Europe, one of the leading lights of European Judaism in the interwar period and after the war. And so I quickly realized this was a very special and very unusual testimony to the time, to the place, and it gave further meaning and impetus to the translation that I was doing of these texts and the project that Jana has so wonderfully curated.
In the evening of October 1st, 1943, the Ruben family was arrested by German police soldiers in their home in Copenhagen. Leon and Betty Ruben, together with their 4 children, Maenni, 21 years old, Daniel, 19, Judith, 17, and Clara, who turned 14 the following day. The family was among the 198 Jews from Denmark who were deported from Copenhagen by ship on October 2nd. In Svinemünde, they were shunned into cattle cars, and after a long journey they arrived to ghetto Theresienstadt in the evening of October 5. All in all, 470 Jews were deported from Denmark to Theresienstadt. Maenni's father, Leon Ruben, died on February 15, 1944, about 4 months after their arrival to the ghetto. During the 18 months of imprisonment, another 50 adults from Denmark died, and so did 2 babies born in the ghetto. Maenni's album was written during the last days of the ghetto's existence and the first days of liberty, and when reading it, one could almost believe that Theresienstadt had been merely a place of art and culture. The hardships of the ghetto life seem already far away. However, the everyday experiences for most prisoners consisted of hard labor and small rations of food of very bad quality. This was so also for people who worked in the so-called Freizeit, the leisure time department. In early 45, for example, many worked in the technical department in the morning, painting signs for the Germans. In the afternoon and evening, he was writing out scores and playing violin for Freizeit. Compared with their fellow ghetto inmates from other countries, the Danes were in a special situation. From March 44, food parcels began to arrive. They were organized by a group of individuals and sponsored mainly by the Danish Ministry of Social Affairs. Because of the nourishing parcels and the fact that the Danish ghetto inmates were, with one exception, exempted from the transports to Auschwitz-Birkenau, 89% of them survived. Maenni, his mother and siblings, were together with the other Danish survivors released and picked up by the white buses in mid-April 45. They were brought through Germany and Denmark to Sweden, where they remained in quarantine for the next few weeks until the war in Europe was over. Maenni's friends in the ghetto created the album after the Danes had been released. One of these friends was Marianne Tzadikov, the daughter of the artist Hilde Tzadikov, who made some drawings in the album. Marianne had a similar album, which was later published. Perhaps she and her mother collected this one for Maenni after his departure. How and when exactly Maenni received it is unclear. But Maenni's album is an important document about music and culture in Theresienstadt. The short entries tell us about friendships formed behind barbed wire, about humor, and about survival.
Hi, my name is Gösta Tixell. Moses Ruben, known as Maenni, was my mom's brother. I was 15 when he passed away, and I believe I'm the only person in this ceremony who actually knew Maenni personally. So I'll share with you some of my memories of him and of his wife, Susi. Maenni was born in Copenhagen, Denmark, and lived there all his life. We lived about 2 hours away across the border in Sweden. Naturally, our lives gravitated towards Copenhagen and the large and well-known Ruben family. Unfortunately, Maenni and Susi did not have any children, and so they directed all their affection and attention onto me and my sister. Maenni never had a driver's license. Like many Danes, he moved around Copenhagen on his bicycle, and that's one of my vivid memories of him. My uncle, dressed in an overcoat and beret and mounted on his bike. Maenni was a master sign painter. When we walked through downtown Copenhagen to the synagogue for Shabbat services, Maenni would point out all the shop signs and shop windows he had made. I visited Maenni in his shop more than once. It was a one-man business, although he did train apprentices. He showed me how to silk screen and he even let me trace the stencil. Maenni also designed a Hebrew letter font, which is still in use in Denmark. Maenni and Susi were practicing Jews. Maenni attended services in the Great Synagogue every Saturday, walking almost an hour each way from their home. I remember him leading the Seder or Passover dinner at my grandma's, dressed up in white garb, and playing the hide-and-seek game with the afikomen and matzah with me and my sister. He was also active in the Jewish community. where he held honorary offices for many years. He was very well known and very well liked. He passed away suddenly in the middle of the night, and the funeral was held at 11 a.m. the next morning. Despite the short notice, hundreds of congregants honored him with their attendance. Maenni and Susi traveled a lot by standards of the time. Susi was from Switzerland and they went there for family visits. They went to Israel to visit my aunt and late uncle. They also went on short vacations to Denmark and elsewhere in Europe. They couldn't really afford to stay in fancy hotels, but Maenni made it a principle to always have coffee and cake in the top 5-star hotel wherever they went. I guess you could say he collected famous hotels in his own way. Maenni's great passion was classical music and playing the violin. He played in an amateur symphony orchestra, where he also served as concertmaster. His violin was apparently a great violin, built by an Italian master and given to him in the Theresienstadt to play in the ghetto orchestra. Somehow he was able to bring it with him back to Denmark during the rescue. Unfortunately, we were never able to trace its provenance, and after his death, Susi donated it to a student. 44 years have passed since Maenni left us. His random collection of autographs from 70 years ago has now earned him a place in a museum collection and added a few more shards of history to Beit Terezin. But for me, he's Uncle Maenni. I miss him dearly.
My name is Sharon Fitch. I first met Susi Deston on Rosh Hashanah of 1993 at Chabad in Vancouver. Growing up in Basel, Susi learned to play the cello and to design fashions as a teenager. And she was a staunch member of B'nai Akiva, the youth movement. During World War II, Susi's father, Herman, was in the Swiss Army, working on the mountain tunnels. He came home from time to time, bringing eggs from a farm. There was much anti-Semitism in Basel at that time. Susi was hidden in the mountains at her aunt's summer home. Susi remembers that her mother received anti-Semitic phone calls. Then Susi married Maenni Ruben in Copenhagen in August of 1952. They had met at a Zionist youth camp, I think in Switzerland. Susi seemed to know hundreds of people around the world. She was always on the phone to Israel, Denmark, South Africa, USA, Switzerland. She kept in touch with hundreds of people. She had a way of getting people to help her. Congregation Emmanuel was her family, really, because she herself had a very small family and they were not in Canada. She was blessed, as I have said, to have 2 husbands who loved her very much. She always had a story. She had hundreds of stories. She always had a new story that you hadn't heard before. It didn't matter how many times you were together with her. She could remember details of a conversation 50 or 60 years ago in minute detail. She always kept in touch with Maenni's family. She could tell you the names of all of their children and grandchildren. Here in Victoria, she didn't drive after Maenni died. After Avi died, she took taxis. She got to know taxi drivers on a first-name basis. She got to know their stories, their whole families. She would actually tell the taxi driver the route to take wherever she wanted to go, and invariably it was the best route to get where she wanted to go. She befriended bank tellers and pharmacy personnel. Oh, she could be stubborn. You didn't tell Susi what to do. She would be very annoyed if you tried to tell her what to do. She loved classical music and philosophy. She was very social. She loved to be out with groups of friends. She never missed an event in the Jewish community. She spoke, half a dozen languages, if not more, that she had learned from her customers at the George Jensen store where she worked. She spoke, the English and Danish and Hebrew and Danish and Dutch and a little Russian, and she spoke in Hosa. And yes, she remained a force like that until her very last moment, and she is deeply missed.
Hello, my name is Martijn Voorveld. I'm editor, copywriter of the Concertgebouw Orchestra, the Concertgebouw Orchestra in Amsterdam. We are in the Concertgebouw before a monument recently erected to commemorate the fate of the Jewish orchestra musicians in the Second World War. In the early 20th century, the Jewish community of Amsterdam was a large and thriving one with nearly 80,000 Jews living in the city. Since its foundation in 1888, the Concertgebouw Orchestra has counted many outstanding Jewish musicians in its ranks. In April 1941, less than a year after the German invasion of the Netherlands, the Concertgebouw Orchestra was told to fire all its Jewish members. At the time, this applied to 16 musicians, nearly a fifth of the orchestra. The last concert, which included all its Jewish musicians, was on the 8th of June 1941. The orchestra played Beethoven's 9th Symphony. The orchestra then had to let go of first violinists Leon Rudelsheim, Jo Hekster and Benjamin Meyer, second violinists Samuel Tromp, Sal Snijder, Louis Pens, Simon Furt, Jacques Koen en Siegfried or Sieg de Boer, Jacques Muller, viola, Samuel Brill, principal cello, Samuel Gomperts, double bass, Louis Salomons, bassoon, Jozef Slochem, trumpet, Emanuel Haagman, trombone, and Rosa Spier, principal harp. The Hungarian violinist Zoltán Székely, who was appointed concertmaster in 1940, was fired a year later when it was found out he too was Jewish. The board members of the orchestra did their best to prevent deportation of the Jewish musicians, making sure most of them were sent to the relatively safe camp Barneveld. Others found refuge elsewhere, like trombonist Emanuel Haagman, who was given refuge by his colleague, the tuba player Adriaan Boersma. From Barneveld, some were sent to other camps. For instance, harpist Rosa Spier and second violinist Siegfried de Boer ended up in Theresienstadt. Several former orchestra members also ended up there, including the violinists Herman Leidensdorf and Judah Poppelsdorf. It is a sad fact that 3 orchestra members did not survive. Double bass player Samuel Gomperts and violist Jacques Muller were murdered in Auschwitz in 1942. On the 18th of May 1943, violinist Simon Furt was sent to Sobibor, where he died 3 days later. Most of the surviving 14 musicians were able to continue their work with the Concertgebouw Orchestra after the war. Fervently hoping this will never happen again, the orchestra will never forget the cruel fate of its Jewish musicians in the war, especially those who died in unspeakable, inhuman conditions.
White buses. Initially, I had no idea what the white buses were. The more I learned about them, the more interesting their story was. The white buses saved over 15,000 prisoners from the concentration camps. When Hitler first came to power, Sweden had protested the Nazis, limiting the freedom and rights of its citizens and interning them into work camps. Then, towards the end of the war, there were worries about what would happen to the Scandinavians in the German camps. The Swedes had heard talk of plans to blow up the camps and have mass executions before the Allies could get there. The White Buses operation was carried out by the Swedish Red Cross starting in the spring of 1945. The British got involved and suggested painting buses white so they could be easily identified. They had the Red Cross emblem painted on the side to avoid being mistaken for military vehicles. There were 308 personnel, of whom 20 were medics and the rest were volunteers. They had hospital buses, trucks, passenger cars, motorcycles, a tow truck, a field kitchen, and full supplies, including food and gasoline, which they could not get in Germany. The Germans insisted the drivers of the buses be German, or else prisoners would be forced to walk 2 kilometers to the outside of the camp. After long negotiations, the Swedish drivers could drive the buses one at a time, each with a German guard escorted by the Gestapo. When the buses stopped on their way through Europe, they spread out a huge Red Cross flag on the ground so they would not inadvertently be bombed. When they finally got to Sweden, they were housed in 2 quarantine camps. On their last day, they were fired upon, passed some of their vehicles that had been shot to pieces, discovered a German spy, delivered a baby, and still got the liberated prisoners to safety. According to the Swedish Red Cross, a total of 15,345 prisoners were saved. Of these, about half were Scandinavian and half from other countries. The white buses was a triumph for Sweden and earned that country much goodwill. After Germany's surrender, the white buses' mission continued for May and June, and an additional 10,000 liberated prisoners were evacuated. White buses was not without some controversy, but overall it was a huge humanitarian action which saved many thousands of people. Currently, the Norwegian White Buses Foundation organizes excursions to sites of concentration camps for school classes, accompanied by first-hand witnesses and survivors.
Hello, I'm Anne-Elliot Goldschmidt, and I knew Susi and Avi Deston not well enough, unfortunately, but I did get to know them a little bit. I got to know them when my younger daughter, Abby, was born. A friend of ours had told me that Susi was a cellist, and so we had music in common. And because she loved quartet music, she let me play on a violin that her late husband, Maenni, had played on while he was in Theresienstadt and then later in life. It was a very beautiful violin. It was a composite in that it was not made by the same person. The top was made by a different maker than the back. But the back of the instrument and the sides were made by an extraordinary maker in Cremona. And so I played on that violin for a little while, and it was really beautiful, and Susi had a chance to hear it, which she really appreciated, I think. And I appreciated having a chance to play on such a beautiful violin.
We know each other only from having greeted each other in a friendly way. But that too is a good memory. All best, Miriam Padis. In memory of the opera evening, Leo Pappenheim. These days of our shared suffering are now behind us, but our friendship, founded on our shared misery, will survive. Illegible signature. I recently read some writing by the German historian Alf Ludtke, who died just over a year ago. Ludtke was a scholar of the everyday life of political violence, of what it was like to suffer the harms perpetrated by 20th century states, and how so many people went along with and even seemed to enjoy that perpetration. Ludtke wrote about dark stuff, and this autograph book, despite its beauty, its poetry, comes to us from the darkness of human history. Ludtke, as I understand him, asks historians to slow down in telling such histories, to dwell in the moment, to ask what he calls how questions. How, he asked. How did they do it? The task of historical analysis, Ludtke writes, the task is not to fall prey to the attraction of seemingly clear-cut distinctions and bold definitions, and to use instead a more sensitive approach to concrete actions and scenes. I find this phrase compelling, a sensitive approach to scenes from the past. When we contemplate a place like Theresienstadt, we can be drawn to ask why. Why did a place like that exist? Why do people hate? Why do we create transportation hubs to send other people to their deaths? And they're important questions, of course. But Maenni Ruben's autograph book can't answer those questions. The stories of most people who lived through these histories can't. But they can, Ludke urges us to see. They can help us to see how people dealt, in Ludke's words, how people dealt with the settings and environments with which they were confronted, how they got through, how they survived, what it was they were doing as the scenes of this terrible history unfolded. This book of Maenni Ruben's, saved for us by Susi Deston, and so beautifully brought to life by Jana, Rick, and Andrew and others. The book is precious in so many ways and for so many reasons. For me, it's precious in part for the glimpse that it gives us of these scenes. We know each other only from having greeted each other in a friendly way, but that too is a good memory. All best, Miriam Paddy's. This short inscription conveys scenes. A young man, Maenni was in his early 20s when he collected these autographs, a young man passing a woman in this horrible place, this prison, this place of survival. What was it like for him to pass her on the pathways of the camp? What was it like for her to pass him? How did they do it? She noticed him, it seems, and felt that he had noticed her, perhaps smiling. They greeted each other in a friendly way. He was an acquaintance, she might have said later. Who knows how their paths might have intersected under different circumstances, or, in fact, if they would have ever met. But this one sentence conveys to us these many scenes. But it also conveys another scene, as do all of these inscriptions, the moment at which they were written, when Maenni pressed the book into Miriam's hands and asked, "Please write." It was the spring of 1945. The ordeal was over. Maenni wanted some words to remember her by. And what could she say? She hardly knew him, and yet, it seems, she did. She knew him to greet him in a friendly way, she quickly wrote. What impression did she imagine these words might make? What impression did they make? I'm fascinated, too, by the scene suggested by Leo Pappenheim when he wrote, "In memory of the opera evening." In memory of the opera evening. I can't read the inscription in its original language, but I can see that opera evening was in quotes there, too. This was an event that happened and had also already been spoken of. It was an evening with a title, the Opera Evening. Among the many nights of music, this one stood out and had been spoken of. These days of our shared suffering are now behind us, but our friendship founded on our shared misery will survive, said someone whose name our remarkable translators and scribes could not decipher, so they've written illegible signature. This inscription makes me think of everything we can't know about these scenes of the past. It makes me think of everything that we miss. Thank you so much again to Jana and to Susi and to the rest of the folks who have brought this wonderful gift to us.
Thank you for watching. It's been an honor to be part of this. These are stories that need to be told today, and we're excited to be sharing this with you. This material and more is going to be available on our website, and we hope you'll visit us sometime. Thank you.